who's in London today. Sorry? Watching the telly? No, that's done and dusted. We've moved on. We've moved on now. We'll all be in Stevenage. Item 2, record of meeting. Are members happy to accept the factual record? Agreed. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Item 3, urgent matters by reason of special circumstances. I'm not aware of any. Councillor Maple, no, we have no urgent matters. So that takes us to item 4, DPIs or OSIs. Any member? You do? Councillor Tijan.
Yes, Chair, just thank you. Just a simple interest in the report, in the work programme and in the minutes. Kindred Limited is mentioned and sit on the board.
Okay, thank you very much. As to whipping, there's no whip on the Conservative group. I assume the same for Labour and Co-op. Okay, thank you very much. That takes us through the formalities, and we welcome our 2 Cabinet members this evening, Councillor Jarrett and Councillor Hackwell. We will have a 5-minute break between their 2 sessions. Okay, Councillor Jarrett, welcome. Thank you for the report that we've had and had an opportunity to read. And as usual, colleagues, there's no formal introduction. We will go straight into questions, but I would suggest that we follow the way that we usually do with Cabinet members. So we'll look at each of their specific identified areas, and we'll take them one by one. So for the leader under 1.1, it is strategic leadership, then comms marketing, and then finance. So I'll divide up, as it were, those sessions for members. So first of all, colleagues, are there any matters from the strategic leadership of the Council? Councillor Maple, please.
Thanks very much and welcome for tonight's session. A few bits on this, I guess, really. Firstly, it's been a disappointing year for this council as regards both city status and city of culture. Although good work was done and those partnership conversations have continued, I wonder whether you have reflected particularly on city status, having had 4 attempts and failed regrettably 4 times, as to whether the decision makers, and I accept entirely technically the decision maker is often the monarch, but from a practical perspective, whether people just don't get Medway and don't understand the concept. And if that's the case, whether we're pushing at a door that will never be open to us. I think most people would want to see us succeed in those sorts of processes. But the argument that we're like Stoke-on-Trent just doesn't seem to be cutting it. And I'm concerned that this might just be an impossibility. So I'd be interested to hear your views on that. We've had quite a strong sense of message from our auditors when it comes to the issue of councillors being on boards. And Councillor Tijan declared his interest, rightfully, earlier on. But the council's chosen to ignore that, and not only ignore it, replaced people with new people on there at a time when, certainly if I'd be given that strong advice by auditors, I think it would be appropriate to consider that very strongly. So I wanted to understand why you think it's right to ignore the advice and guidance from auditors who are there to do the job for us, to make sure that we're compliant. And then finally, on strategic leadership, we're now, this time next week, going to be close to having a 3rd Prime Minister, which doesn't help the strategic leadership of Medway or indeed any other council in the country. As somebody who I understand voted for Liz Truss, I don't know whether you'd like to take this opportunity to apologise to the families of Medway, who now will be paying hundreds of pounds more on their mortgages as a direct result of her flawed ideology, which has been kicked out quicker than David Blaine was kicked out of a plastic box. Thank you.
Leader.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Councillor Maple, for firstly welcoming me and then asking me those questions, which were really interesting. First two were quite interesting. The last one was just a political one, so if you don't mind, I'll pass on it. So what I'm going to say is that with regards to city status and city of culture, of course, both disappointments, but I don't actually take a linear view on this at all. I see those opportunities, an opportunity to promote Medway the place, and if we were paying a marketing company to get that amount of exposure for Medway, it would be a pretty expensive exercise, I think, and doubtful whether you'd even get the same exposure. For example, City of Culture would have cost the council significant sums of money during the City of Culture period, the process. But we can compare that with for example, the £14 million levelling up fund money we got, which came around the same time as the process. And the levelling up money was a competitive one, and not every council got that. In fact, I spoke to other council leaders in Kent who were very fed up that they didn't get it and quite envious of us. So I think that's all to do with Medway's size and scale and profile. That's the way I see that. Your question on city states is a little bit more complex, isn't it? Because first you use the word never. Well, never's a long time, isn't it? So how do we know we're never going to get city status or indeed anything else? And how did those politicians come before us? Did they, when they were bidding for unitary status for Medway, did they say, this is a step too far, you know, we'll never achieve that, let's not bother? So I don't accept the premise of the question. Again, it's about profile, isn't it? And each time we've failed, in inverted commas, to achieve that accolade, we've learnt something, we've moved Medway forward. So, for example, I'll give you an example when Chelmsford was awarded city status, not this time, the one before. One of the things I did when I was on missionary work in Essex anyway, I called into, had a look at Chelmsford, and I'd read the reasons why we'd not succeeded, and I looked at why Chelmsford was better than Medway, and of course it's not better than Medway, but the big criticism of us, if it be a criticism at that time, was that we did not have a coherent city centre. And when I went to Chelmsford, it was quite obvious that they did. All right, district, relatively small town, but they did have a coherent city centre, and that's one of the reasons we've embarked on the programme of work that we've been doing in Chatham all this time. And we will develop and have in place a city centre over the next 2, 3, 4 years that we'd be really proud of and build on. In terms of councillors on boards, I didn't ignore what the auditors said. In case it hasn't escaped members, that we run the council, the external auditors don't. They give us advice. Now, they may be advice that they gave us, and they may be saying, well, it's best practice, you know, but I actually look at it slightly differently. If there was a paucity of talent in my cabinet, then maybe I would take what the auditors say on board, but there's not. If we take MDC, for example, Howard Doe, chairman of MDC, is a qualified company secretary with decades of work in that area. Adrian Golvin is eminently qualified to do that. Phil Filmer runs a very successful business of his own and is eminently qualified to chair the Medway North Board. And the most recent appointment, Councillor Tijan, has an excellent business background and is well qualified to do the work in Kindy. So I think it's horses for courses, isn't it? If you've got a good pool of talent to do a particular job, I think you should harness it. And I don't think you should be shackled by external advice and best practice. I think, and what we've always done, this administration has always done, we've done what we perceive to be is best for Medway. And in this case, I think we're doing what's best for Medway.
Thank you for those answers. And this isn't about, just on the councillors on boards, this isn't about the individuals, although I do think in one previous case an individual has left the council wanting when it comes to honesty, integrity and other matters, but that will be dealt with elsewhere, I suspect. This is about the principle. So from that perspective, I agree with the principle that the external auditors, I can hear loud and clear, that's not a principle you agree on. Just the final point from me on this section, I'll have questions later on in the evening on the other two sections. On the most recent city status bid, I don't think I've seen any. I accept that last time round the feedback was clear. You haven't got a city centre, and the other bit of the feedback was the public don't really buy into this. I think we're still on a journey with that second bit, if I'm honest. But I haven't seen any feedback on the most recent example. Now, I accept entirely government has been having a variety of focuses since that decision was made. But if there has been detailed feedback, it would be helpful to share that, certainly with all members of this committee. Thank you.
Chairman, I've not seen any that is particularly helpful, and certainly I'll get it dug out and circulated to members such as it was. But you and I spoke about this, Councillor Maple, and I think we both agreed that in the event of the tragedy in Southend and Southend's subsequent award of city status, the likelihood of city status, when I'm probably, if I stood on tiptoe, I could see Southend from my office window. I think the prognosis was pretty poor. And there's an element, isn't there, when it comes to looking at city status bids and decision making, there's an element of quotas going on, scattered around the country, and we saw that before. So as soon as Southend, the tragedy occurred, and they got that city status, in my mind, although I never said so, I thought to myself, well, this is a write-off, we're not going to get city status, and so it turned out. As and when there's another event, usually centred around the monarchy, isn't it? Those who run in Medway Council at that time, and I won't be amongst you, in fact, none of you might be here, who knows, the vagaries of the electorate, they will decide whether or not to go for a bid and what is in Medway's best interests. I personally think it has always been Medway's best interest to do that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Curry, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for coming along this evening and for your report. I'm going to focus on the second part of the report, part 2, which you've highlighted as achievements, if I may. And I've got three sort of areas, or three sort of four-ish areas I'd like to cover, if I may. Missing from this list of achievements, massive hole to sort of define your period of leadership, which is a real shame. So I'm just wondering, and the question there really is, are you closer to gaining any further support from your own members in getting this through, or are we looking at a sort of chaotic situation that we've seen over the last sort of 12, 18 months in relation to the local plan, similar perhaps to the National Party's chaotic situation there? And focusing in particular, in that respect, on the Chatham docks. There is the ACOM report, which I think is due in November. We're still not clear, so I'd like to know if that's a definite, are we going to see the ACOM report? And I'd like to know a little bit more about how the consultation for that was carried out. In particular, has the consultation...
To carry it
sorry.
Sorry.
The piece about Chatham docks I didn't get.
Oh, sorry, apologies for that. It's about the consultation through ACOM and how robust you feel. That's what it is, my microphone. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. That's great, thanks. Apologies for that, my microphone failed on me. I was referring to the ACOM report and Chatham docks, and whether you feel the consultation has been robust enough on that, and why has it taken so long? Why haven't we seen it? And are we confident that it's going to come up in November as we expect? And I think that in that respect, it's a kind of an issue that will continue to linger until we get this issue resolved. The local plan is going to struggle whilst this is continuing. So it really is very important that we have some answers on this issue as soon as possible. Do you hold the same position that you've always held in relation to that, or are you perhaps now realising that the democratic majority of councillors would prefer the employment status of that area to remain the same? So that's a question in that. My second area of questioning is in relation to paragraph 2.7 of your report, and that's in relation to the monumental regeneration programme. Monumental, perhaps leaving a sort of monumental stonemasons might be around doing stuff there. I don't know where that word comes from. However, my question there is in relation to IPM, which is mentioned in the report. Can we have an update, please, on any further interest in any businesses that want to move into the IPM site? I mean, I find it quite interesting that you talked about the sort of the talent that you have available to hands, and yet we still seem to be struggling, and have done, to attract any businesses onto this site at all. So that's a question about what further interest has there been in relation to IPM. And then my third question is kind of more specific, if you like, and that's in relation to Section 106 agreements. We've heard quite a lot in relation to the WHO development framework and how important the Section 106 money is for WHO. And the drive that's been given, and a great long list of things that are needed under the development framework, everything from doctors' surgeries to sports facilities and stuff like that, which will need to be delivered, and the importance of Section 106. And yet just a couple of weeks ago, Peel have come forward on their water side development, asking us to take £440,000 off the 106 there, and that was vigorously supported or talked up by Councillor Galvin in the planning meeting. It was rejected by the planning committee, along with my own vote on that to reject it as well. And just 2 weeks later, Medway Development Company asked us to take, or were planning to ask us to take £600,000 off the Garrison Point 106 agreement, and that was pulled from the planning committee at the last minute. So I really wonder what your feeling is, how important Section 106 money is for WHO, and how that we can only deliver the WHO developments with that money. And at the same time, we are now finding a company that we actually are responsible for wanting to pull 106 money from the centre of Chatham, with Councillor Galvin clearly in support of that kind of thing, and yet, even though he turned up to the planning committee, which is a bit weird. And then at the same time, that would add up to over £1 million worth of infrastructure funding for the centre of Chatham, just at the point when we're putting in about 1,500 new homes and probably over 2, maybe even 3,000 people moving in there. So I'd like to hear your view around why it is that Section 106 money is so important, and yet at the moment we're seeing it pulled from our own company doing that same sort of behaviour. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks for the questions, Councillor Curry. I think you've answered your first question yourself, haven't you, when you said that the democratic majority of councillors are in favour of retention of the docks, and thereby hangs the tail. So I think you need to ask those people who have those views. And
sorry, can we pause you there, Leader? We're going to swap your microphone. Yes, they look like triffids, these things.
Becoming quite used to this. We had this cabinet Tuesday. Need to buy some more batteries. That was what? Bring forward the local.
Technology.
Usually work fine.
As I was saying, thanks, Joe. As I was saying, I think you answered the question yourself. The majority of members at Regulation 19 stage decided they wanted to retain the docks as a working dock, and that's the democratic right of people to do that. It's just a shame you didn't do that. Those that have that view. It's a shame it didn't have that view at Regulation 18 stage when it was voted through unanimously. So there's a bit of self-questioning to be asked there, and were those views framed by the need to retain employment, or were those views framed as a result of the visit from your party leader at the 2019 election and making Chatham Docks a cause célèbre for your party and for some other members, some of whom are here now. So whether the local failure to deliver the local plan defines my leadership or not, that is out of my hands, because there is not consensus on it. That is now a pointless question, because you will know on Tuesday Cabinet agreed to revert to Regulation 18, so you can all get in a huddle and decide at Regulation 18 what you want in the local plan and what you don't. And I wish you well with that. In terms of the future of the docks, well, that won't be decided by this council. It will be decided by the owner, ultimately, and whether or not the owner wishes to continue with the employment use, or whether they want to continue with their aspirations for mixed use, which you all agreed in Regulation 18, and that will be a matter for themselves to bring that forward in the new Regulation 18 if they so wish, and for members to take a view on that when that moment comes around. And any disputes of the docks, including has consultation been robust or not, that's going to be a matter for the owner and for the tenants and for others to decide, not my administration. 2.7. You obviously haven't been keeping up to date with reading, Councillor Curry, because the word monumental came from our peer review. And the peer review said we had a monumental regeneration programme, and why wouldn't we repeat that and repeat it? Because it happens to be true. Something we're very proud of here. And I think all members, including actually cross-party, have at times played a part in developing that monumental programme. In terms of the IPM update, it's been a checkered history, hasn't it? Not least because of external factors, which is not an excuse, but a statement of fact. Because we were going nicely along with development of the IPM and until COVID came along. And we all know the financial consequences and constraints that COVID brought about. Nonetheless, one of the things I was particularly proud of as leader was that throughout the COVID pandemic, we managed to continue the capital programme in particular, almost without missing. I'll come stand in the middle there, shall I shout at you? Sooner rather than later, don't you? The capital programme, by and large, continued without missing a beat in terms of infrastructure, in terms of delivery. Of course, what we've had subsequently is the current financial position where we've seen construction costs and soar, and we've seen lots of other difficulties occur. But in terms of the IPM and the future direction of travel, the groundworks for the southern site have been completed. We are at heads of terms with the anchor tenant, and obviously I can't announce that because it is commercially sensitive, but we are very confident that will now come on board. The northern site, the groundworks, as everyone should know, is well underway, and we are not quite at heads of terms with a first tenant there. So we're actually making progress. Now, the fact that we don't have more tenants is a fault of the administration because we are absolutely focused on what that business park, what that innovation park should look like. So we've had a fair number of inquiries, I'd almost say a large number of inquiries, that have not ticked the right boxes for us because we'll only get one chance to develop that. We've had a major inquiry from a nationally known investor who wanted to purchase about a third of the site. we would have had no control over what happened next. We would have had no control over the quality of businesses, no control over the number of jobs or the quality of those jobs. So we're absolutely holding a really firm line that we have a clear vision of what Innovation Park Medway needs to look like, and that's we're sticking to that. And if it takes a little longer to get the right tenants in place, well, so be it. If we do the wrong thing, if we take anyone that rocks up and knocks on the door with a wad of cash, Medway will rue the day, and we won't get the outcomes that we expect there. In terms of Section 106, of course, that's a matter for planning, isn't it? And I get rather piqued, and whether it's MDC or whether it's Peel or whoever, I get personally a bit piqued about people that talk about, companies that talk about, "No, we can't do this now because of viability issues." And I just wonder about that sometimes. So I actually take the view that people sign up to Section 106s, they should deliver them. That's just my view, very simplistic view. It will be very important for who, because the housing infrastructure project, funded project, is £170 million. That is purely for the road, rail and SEMS infrastructure, as you know. All those proliferation of requirements that you spelt out, Councillor Curry, will be needed and will have to be funded from Section 106 money. And therefore it's important that we get the right amount of Section 106 money, that people deliver that money when those milestones, build milestones are reached, and that in response those facilities can be built and delivered for the people of who, present and future. I think one of the things there's going to be issues with are around health. Necessarily bricks and mortar, as you know, do not make a health service. So I think they've got bricks and mortar there at the moment. They don't necessarily have this type of health service they want in that area. So there's a lot of work to be done with partners in terms of delivery. But nonetheless, it's at a very early stage. And you know the stage we're at, the Who Development Framework. There's a lot of water going to flow under the bridge after that. And we'll press on with it as much as we can.
If I may, Chair, just there was one other question about ACOM and the production of the, is that now due in November, as we think it is, and about the robustness of the consultation they've taken? Just thank you, Chair.
Well, I'm not sure how robust it is, and we'll see when it comes back, won't we?
Thank you. So we're still on strategic leadership. Just to remind colleagues, Councillor Murray, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks for your report, Alan. And I think it's important that you acknowledged everything that's happened with the passing of Her Majesty the Queen, and the hard work and effort that went into by our officers and everybody to make sure that people in Medway could respond to that situation in the way that they wanted to. And I also wanted to acknowledge that you have decided to make sure that the Homes for Ukraine scheme was put into your report, and you've talked about the good relationship that eventually has been formed with Medway Help for Ukrainians charity. I would draw your attention to the fact that the Homes for Ukraine scheme, the government scheme, is coming to an end, and there is a possibility that we'll have people here now whose the host families are not able to continue to look after them because of the cost of living crisis. And those families are likely, many of them, and I had a meeting with Medway Help for Ukrainians last Friday, to find themselves homeless. Some of them have done very well, which is welcome, with support from council officers, which has been tremendous, and the DWP. Some of the refugee families have done very, very well. They've got jobs, and some of them have moved out of the family host homes and started to rent their own properties and, you know, make a life in Medway. For others, with more compelling language problems and other difficulties, that's not the case. So I would like to say to you, are you aware of what could happen, and are you working with council officers who've been involved in this project to make sure that provision is made? That's my first question. I wanted also to talk about 2.4. You mentioned the response to the pandemic, and again, I've paid tribute to council officers many times for the innovation, flexibility and commitment that they showed to getting us through that. But I wonder if you agree with the situation where the possibility of a pandemic has been removed from the risk register. In the Labour group, we don't agree that that should happen. We think it should have remained there. And we don't support the idea that just because we've been through it and we know what to do, that would mean that we necessarily would be in a position again to respond to a pandemic in the same way, because it might be a different pandemic. And therefore, keeping that on the risk register seems to us to be a prudent and sensible thing to do.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Murray. Yes, I too have meetings with the Homes for Ukraine and drop into the office there sometime and talk to them. They've done a wonderful job. I have regular meetings along with relevant portfolio holder with officers about this issue. We've been having monthly meetings ever since the issue came to light, working through, seeing what needs to be done, what problems they're encountering, and the future. Now, I've always been very clear, long before I was leader, when I had finance portfolio and the deputy leadership, that we pursue a policy of hypothecation. And I think that's really important to recognise that across the piece, not this in particular, but across the piece, because our budgets are very tight and very stretched, and this year will be no exception. So we have to bear in mind how we go forward when funding is ceased, and that's my policy of hypothecation. Now, how we respond to the end of that funding, well, there are two strands to it. First of all, will the government provide any further funding beyond the end of this tranche? Question mark. We don't know the answer to that. Definitively, we will of course continue to lobby the government through our 3 Conservative MPs to provide more funding beyond that so that the scheme can continue undiminished. If that doesn't come to pass, then we will, as an administration and more widely, we will have to decide how we respond to that funding gap. What I will say is that Homes for Ukraine, the charity, is delivering some excellent work in a very cost-effective way. So it may well be that in the absence of government funding, we can bring budget proposals forward that will help to alleviate and take account of that gap. But I think jury's out on all of that at the moment. One thing I am very focused on, and our whole administration is very focused on, is that the plight of these people and our duty to help vulnerable people, whether they come from Ukraine or from elsewhere, and that's a policy we'll continue with. The matter of funding will be something we'll have to deal with, as I say, when we have a bit more clarity. Yes, of course there could be another pandemic. I suppose the judgment to remove it from the risk register was a tight one, whether we leave it on or whether we don't. But however, having said that, it doesn't matter whether an issue is on the risk register or not. It won't alter the way in which we respond. And I think what we saw with the pandemic, how proactively this council responded. We led the way in Kent on some of the initiatives that we brought forward in the pandemic. We led the way in terms of public health and the response to the pandemic. I was really proud of the work collectively we did over a prolonged period of time. In fact, as you all know, we had many months of cross-party working on that, and that only ceased when the worst phase of the pandemic had fortunately moved on. So just because it's not on the risk register doesn't mean to say we're not taking account of it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Turpin, please. After your question, we'll move on to the next section.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, I've just got a few questions, Leader. On behalf of the some clarification about the Sports Centre, because you mentioned splashes in there, but it was a few years ago that the WHO promised some detailed work on the sports centre there, and we're not aware that that's been carried out. So on behalf of the people of WHO, can we have some clarity on that? Because it'd be very great to have some aspirational stuff for them to look forward to with all the development that's going on there. The IPM, which is in my ward, you've already explained quite a lot about that, but I just want to clarify, if there's it started out as a research, sort of scientific, sort of almost a university type of campus style. That was the aim of it. It was very innovative, etc. If that changed and we had to lower the criteria, would that be notified? How would that be notified? Would it be notified to LEP, or would there be a change of policy? Would that have to go through any policy decisions? The Chatham waterfront, I'm a bit concerned as the Garrison Point issue about their section 106 coming back. Do you know anything about the Chatham waterfront, whether that's, because that's in a more tricky site, so if we can't get the section 106 from the Garrison Point, what would be the chances of getting it from the Chatham waterfront? And indeed, you know, how is that progressing? Given that it's on a more tricky site, do you know any more about that? Child-friendly Medway, I'm really pleased with all the stuff we're doing on the child-friendly Medway. The only slight concern I've got is that I've noticed that when we do our annual report, we're building more and more apartments and flats in Medway, and I'm just a bit concerned that is that really the best type of accommodation for families, and do we keep an eye on that, whether, I know that it's obliquely related to child-friendly, but is there any thoughts on whether having over 50% of flats and apartments is not going to be good in the long term for however many other activities we do for children to make Medway child-friendly? And regarding your point about the Chatham docks, which you made earlier, I think the point which we made at Regen last week was about the designation factor. So that's where we come in. I know it's shaping up to be maybe a legal battle, but our choice of designation, whether it's employment use or residential, could be critical in any legal battle which Councillor Chitty was anticipating between the Chatham Docks companies and Peel Ports. And the HIF, finally, the HIF, the delay on the HIF, is there anything coming out about the evidence base which can be added in? Because it's very, very sensitive on environmental grounds and on the access. We know that, for example, without road improvements, it's only really able to have another 1,000 homes out on the Hoo Peninsula. That was the evidence that emerged from a meeting between, due to a cooperate meeting between Maidstone and Medway. So we need that HIF to have the higher numbers of houses. That HIF has been a bit delayed, but we're also delayed on the evidence base, and we've got the modelling work going on, etc., and consultants have been coming in to look at both the environmental habitat survey side of things and also the transport side of things for avoiding congestion on and off the peninsula. You've also mentioned recently in an interview about the erosion of the evidence base, so that's a bit concerning. So where are we with that evidence base to reassure the people of the peninsula, and that any development over there is sustainable?
Thank you.
Thanks,
Leader.
Councillor Turpin. Thank you, Chairman. The Who Sports Centre, this is all, everything that happens around the Who is now going to flow from the Who Development Framework, which is why we're consulting on that. And bearing in mind, it's not a consultation, not a statutory consultation that we were obliged to do. It's just a sensible and pragmatic approach that the administration took. So everything will flow from that. In terms of the IPM, when I answered the question, Councillor Curry earlier, I made it quite plain that so long as I'm leader, those, which won't be for much longer, you'll be pleased to know, our aspirations for that site will not diminish. Now, whether a further future administration takes a different approach, that will be a matter for them. But I'm very clear that the thinking behind Innovation Park Medway, there's been no change in that, and that is why we've turned down so many investment opportunities. I don't doubt over the next 7 months, if they come forward and don't meet the criteria, we will turn down others. So there's been no diminishment in that. If we did diminish it, because it wasn't a policy decision in the first place. So if a future administration wants to change the criteria, I don't see that as a policy decision, but that's a matter for ultimately the monitoring officer to advise on if it comes to it. Chatham Waterfront is a much more difficult site than Garrison Point, I accept. But I think we're still at the build-out stage. We are fortunate in as much as we bought quite a substantial proportion of materials in advance, well in advance of the build. So we're still using those, but of course materials are now more expensive. Labour is harder to come by, and I don't want to prejudge what might or might not come forward from it. But I accept it is a more difficult site. And whether that leads to viability issues or not, I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. In terms of child-friendly Medway, this is something that I introduced, very proud of it, very proud of the way that Amy, initially, the member of staff that is leading it, threw herself into it, and her enthusiasm is absolutely infectious. And that's why we had the confidence to invest more money into it, albeit small amounts of money, because of the impact that she's having. Now, whether that should determine what accommodation we build across Medway, that's an entirely different matter, isn't it? I can see why you're making the link, but I don't have a definitive view on that because, to my knowledge, there are plenty of children that live happily in apartments where the apartments are suitable. I don't necessarily see the link. What I do see is important is that with anything that we build or anything we give planning permission for, that every effort is made to design out opportunities for antisocial behaviour, which affects adults and, of course, children. So that's really important. That's something we're looking at on the waterfront. It's important to us. So I don't see a link between apartments and flats and a poor service and poor life chances for children. I don't see the link there. In terms of Chatham Docks, of course, designation is important. But again, all members agreed on designation at Regulation 18, and members will take a view on that in due course. But of course, sometimes it's be careful what you wish for, isn't it? So members didn't want Regulation 19, and now we've got unfettered development. Thereby hangs a tale, doesn't it? So I know the Planning Committee has been working hard and has been rightly turning down planning applications, and the likelihood of those applications being overturned on appeal, because we don't have a 5-year land supply, etc., etc. The prognosis there is that they will be overturned on appeal is very high. As I say, members sometimes need to be careful what they wish for. In terms of HIF, yes, it would be nice, as we've been doing with the disagreement with Maidstone, to have a definitive link between roads and the number of houses being brought forward. But there's a different dynamic at place at Who, in as much as I've done more than anyone to ensure that the Who consortium of landowners and developers has been patient, has been waiting for us to put the local plan in place. Now that they can see that Regulation 19 is some way off, probably 2 years off, I think it's fair to say their patience is now wafer thin. So you may say, and I don't argue with the premise, that without the roads there'll only be 1,000 houses. Well, you tell that to developers as they bring forward their planning applications for not 1,000 houses, but thousands of houses over time in the vacuum created by the lack of a local plan. Be careful what you wish for. In terms of the erosion of the evidence base, I was referring to the timescale there. The evidence base created to allow Regulation 19 to go out to consultation is now becoming, with every week that goes by, becomes increasingly dated. So what will happen now with Regulation 18, as agreed by Cabinet this week, is that evidence base will be refreshed, be repopulated, and that will be eventually presented to members to then make an informed decision. So that's why I use the word erosion. Erosion of the evidence base is, for me, is a time-based thing. And if we were to put evidence bases to developers and perhaps planning inspectorates that were antiquated, that weren't up to date, you could imagine how an inspector would respond to that. So it's important that we have refreshed evidence bases to go with a Regulation 18 that eventually the new members of this council will agree.
Thank you very much, Leader. Colleagues, we're going to move on to communications and marketing section of the report. I'm very conscious of the time and that we have another Cabinet member to hold to account. So other questions from members, please indicate on communications and marketing from page 22. Okay, 3 members indicating. Any members on this side indicating so that I can judge the timing? 4 members on this side. Okay. Right, we'll make a start. In no particular order, Councillor Maypole.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the answers so far. On the comms piece, I'd say 3 things. Firstly, both you and I are fans of football. That's a good thing. Football is a good thing. I mention that because, in a rarity, my team's top of the league at the moment. But we've got the World Cup coming up, and we know that, regrettably, during World Cup tournaments, domestic violence dramatically increases. So I'd urge you, I'm sure the answer will be yes on this. I know there's a good plan for the 25th of November, the first day of World Cup, but also the launch of the White Ribbon Day and part of the 14 days of action. So just a commitment that there'll be a strong social media message around domestic abuse, recognising, I say, those tragically increased numbers during that tournament. Secondly, we've spoken a couple of times tonight around child-friendly Medway, and I agree, particularly, I've said it elsewhere, I'll say it here, I think Amy as a council officer and as a kind of advocate for our young people is a great officer, and long may she stay in post. I guess my concern at this stage, and if you need to come back with more detail, happy to receive that, is there seems to be a lot of information gathering, but not much action. Some cynically would say that's not dissimilar to the climate change working group. I wouldn't say that because I'm not cynical, I'm positive and I love Medway. So I'd be interested to hear your view on actually, particularly because we've taken a decision not to take the UNICEF definition of a child-friendly city. And that's clearly a political decision, one I don't agree with, but we are where we are. when do you think the young people, and in fact all the people of Medway, will see a practical change in our communities as a result of us aiming to be a child-friendly city? And then finally, as someone who's got political responsibility for communications, do you think it's acceptable that somebody from Medway has written to the chief executive nearly a year ago and hasn't had an acknowledgement even of their letter? I think they may have copied you into the same letter as well, but they've not even had an acknowledgement from them. That was following Councillor Chitty making the offer to work on the issue of a compulsory purchase order. So not even receive an acknowledgement of a letter is a bit rude. And I'm sure you're not a rude person. So perhaps you could try and understand why, you know, even if the letter said, thank you very much, Councillor Chitty misspoke, we're never going to do this. Again, not necessarily a letter I would send, but at least there'd be a recognition. I think the service level that residents should expect is 10 working days. It's a lot more than that without any response. So I'd be interested to hear your view on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Maple, and thank you, Chairman. Answer to the first one, yes, as you prophesied. We've actually been talking about this quite recently, about this issue of people get overly excited about football. I must say that I got overly excited in a bad way yesterday evening, for example, but there was no domestic abuse flowed from it. So I guess it's very much down to individuals how they want to behave, and we'll do all we can to discourage people to behave properly and to protect those that may eventually be victims of domestic abuse. And let's hope there's none this time. I don't agree with what you say about child-friendly Medway being just about information gathering. I think we've only got to look at what's the work that Amy and now her small team has been doing. It's information gathering is an important part of it. And that was, in the early stages, that was about what do you want? What do you young people want? But now we're going on and delivering things like the City Hall events, like the wonderful event a couple of Saturdays ago in Chatham, which made a massive impact on footfall in Chatham, and the Pentagon Centre in particular, and absolutely thoroughly enthused the children, the parents and children that attended. So I think what we're seeing is a fairly new initiative, and we didn't follow the UNESCO template because, again, excuse me, again, I took the view that, well, let's evaluate something and do what we think is right for Medway, and that's not following sheepishly UNESCO or an external auditor or indeed another council or anybody else. Let's evaluate it and do what we think's best for Medway. So I'm really enthused by what they've done so far. As regards to the final point, certainly I can only speak for myself. I always ask my PA to at least send a holding response to people, and I hope that always happens. I suppose things can get missed, but that's the general modus operandi, a holding letter, and then passing the particular query through the Officer Corps for a detailed response, and if possible, resolution.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Jarrett, for coming this evening and for your report. I was interested to hear you say earlier about the importance of protecting and supporting vulnerable people in Medway, and I think the three areas that I'd like to ask about each involve vulnerable people. Firstly, the decision by the administration not to fund vouchers for free school meals over the summer holidays. The suggestion was that the household support fund could be accessed by those families of children eligible for free school meals, but as it turned out, only 700 families did access the household support fund. It was also suggested that the Holiday Activities Fund, in itself a fine initiative, would also be an acceptable substitute for the voucher schemes over the summer, despite the fact that the total number of places on the Holiday Activities Fund is something like 10% of the required number of places that there would be, even if all the places were limited to children eligible for free school meals. Free school meals the vouchers had been funded in various forms, wasn't always vouchers, over all the school holidays since the pandemic. Something like 50% of English authorities funded vouchers for free school meals over the summer holidays. All of the authorities in Wales, all the authorities in Scotland funded those free school meals. So I just wonder whether you are still happy with that decision not to fund vouchers for children eligible for free school meals over the holiday that has not long finished, particularly since the decision has now been taken to fund free school meals over the October half term, 1 week at Christmas and the February half term. So whether you are happy, proud that your administration took that decision for those particularly vulnerable Medway families at a time of financial hardship. Also vulnerable, children's services. I think we would like to be able to agree that children's services under the strong leadership that we have are making what seems to be real improvements. It's difficult to tell from the monitoring visits, but there does seem to be sustained progress. But we're in a different phase of that at the moment. We're now coming towards the end game over the next few months, the next year or so potentially, of the final ILACS inspection, the final ILACS judgment, crucial judgment for your administration, for the administration during the course of that final assessment. And two threats, I think, two risks. Firstly, what's always been a financial risk. The administration has invested in children's services. I think we've been happy to acknowledge that. But there are some remaining real problems, some remaining real challenges, particularly the market in placements, a practically unregulated market in which providers are able to charge more or less whatever they like. And that's not an issue that Medway itself can address, but it is a threat to Medway's improvement in terms of the amount of money that's required. And I'll pair it with the other threat, which is the threat to workforce. So we've had a government that hasn't planned a workforce in all sorts of areas across the last 12 years. We're seeing the effects of that poor workforce planning in the NHS, within Medway's council, in Ed Sykes, and I'm particularly focusing on social workers. So we went through a phase where recruitment of social workers was very strong. The agency workers was diminishing. That, sadly, is reversing. So again, an issue for Medway that's got a national dimension. I'm just wondering what you as leader are doing in both of those areas, both the costing area and the workforce area, to safeguard the hard work that's been put in by the leadership and by the workers in the directorate to ensure that children's services are where they should be. And finally, perhaps the most vulnerable group that I'll raise, you said it's important to protect and support vulnerable people. Well, among the most vulnerable are unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. It's been your decision to institute a judicial review of the National Transfer Scheme, to effectively put up a barrier to Medway doing its part for these most vulnerable people. They are refugees and they are, by definition, young and unaccompanied. I'm interested to know what progress the JR has made, and I'm interested to know what it has cost and what your projected cost is. Thank you, Councillor Jarrett. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Some really interesting questions, actually. I think it is self-evident by the decision we just made over vouchers. It is self-evident, therefore, that we didn't get it right last time. And I think it's, there's no shame in admitting that, because I think and we've seen this more recently at national level, where you get things right, it's quite right to trumpet them, and where things aren't, you haven't got things quite right, then you change it, unless you're a fool, and we've changed it. So I can't say any more about it than that, really, to be quite honest. I will say members should take care about comparing us with what happens in Wales and Scotland, because they're beneficiaries of the Barnett formula, and they have a substantially higher settlement per capita than we have in England. In terms of children's services, yes, there is sustained progress. The monitoring visits have been encouraging, but we're not out of the woods yet by a long way, and we have the ILACs to come, as you say, and the ILACs is likely to be in the spring. Don't quite know how government inspection are going to define spring, but anyway, in the spring, and the results will be known late spring, summer. I don't know, I'm not quite sure exactly where. What I am sure is that we're very focused on maintaining the trajectory that we are putting in place. It's interesting and correct that you mentioned the provider market. We are being, all local authorities in England, being held ransom by the market. Various reasons for that. Out-of-area placements are hugely expensive for us. And I'll come back to UASCs, because you've actually answered your question yourself with regards to UASCs. There is a national shortage of social workers, so we've had to revert more and more back to agency workers. But the paradox here is there's a shortage of agency workers as well. And they're forming now into banks, I think they call them, whereby they can provide, instead of one social worker, they can provide a number of social workers, all neatly packaged up and at an increased cost to the local authority. And that's something we're having to grapple with, and we've just actually agreed even more money to fund that, to keep that going. Now, the issue of UASCs is an issue that is at the heart of this, really, and it's all about capacity. Why do we have out-of-area placements? Because we don't have the capacity internally, do we? Otherwise, we wouldn't have out-of-area placements. That's self-evident. When the government asked for put in place a voluntary scheme for UASCs, we did not volunteer to be part of that scheme, because we were housing at that time something like 148, I think it was, placements from other local authorities, from KCC and from some of the London boroughs. So our view was, and we were sending children out of area. So it's quite obvious to me that Medway did not have the capacity. The government then went further and said, well, we're going to consult on a direction. And I think it was 29 local authorities that they wrote to, including us, and said, we're minded to issue a direction that you will take social work, UASCs. What do you think? I'm paraphrasing. So we wrote back and said, the reason we've taken this stance is because, and we set out very clearly what the capacity issues were. And the government came back and said, just do it anyway. Again, I'm paraphrasing. They dressed it up a bit. And as I said in an answer earlier about auditors and etc., we will do what's right for Medway. So it's self-evident if we're sending our children out of area to expensive out-of-area placements. We had one just a week before last, £11,000 a week. Do the maths yourself. You're a bright counsellor. Those sort of numbers aren't sustainable for us. So the only response was to seek leave for a judicial review. Part of the government's defence was, well, you might as well do it because no one else has complained. Rather odd angle of defence. Well, fortunately, learned people on the bench decided that actually, maybe you do have a case, and we'll give you leave to seek a judicial review. And that is likely to be in the new year now. And I'm absolutely delighted about that, because what that will do, that will allow us to do the best for the children that we have here and to work hard on minimising the number of out-of-area placements. So the government, you know, they sent us a small list of named children that you will take under this direction. And, of course, the judicial review process has stopped that. So the direction cannot be applied to us until the JR process has been outworked. Whether we win the JR or not, I don't know. But what I do know, irrespective of what it costs, you do the maths yourself. How many times do you have to have an £11,000 a week out of area placement before you end up with a very, very large sum of money which will far exceed anything we might spend on a judicial review? So I'm absolutely determined and absolutely clear in my mind we're doing the right thing for the children that we have here and are likely to have here, and we don't need the government bullying us into doing something differently.
Thank you. Councillor Murray, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask you about events and festivals, Councillor Jarrett. You've quite rightly got a big section on the events and festivals that we've had, and you've mentioned the positive economic impact that they can have and the variety of things that were available. You didn't mention Medway Pride, which was a tremendous festival and probably in its entirety bigger than most of the ones that you have mentioned. And I think for those who organised it, they did so with fairly minimal support from the council, setting themselves up as a CIC. And similarly, the Chatham Reach is a festival that's got drivers within the community. Now, you may say, well, you've put lots of festivals there, but I think particularly for the LGBTQ community, it was a very important festival, and certainly we were there. The Labour Party had a stall at the Medway Pride Festival, and in fact it was a really nice occasion. There were people from all backgrounds, from many different areas. In fact, you know, it was almost more of a family festival than it was anything else, because there was a lot of fun and music going on. So I think it deserves a mention. It's something for us to be very proud of, and it's something that the council should recognise. And similarly, on a smaller scale, it's the same for Chatham Reach. And that model of supporting grassroots organisations to become partly self-funding and self-sustaining is a good way to increase the diversity of arts across the whole of the community. And I suggest to you that, you know, the more of that sort of grassroots involvement and commitment and success that we can demonstrate, the more likely we would be to be a city of culture. Because if you look at the City of Culture winner, that type of attitude towards celebration and, if you like, community pride in its widest sense was very evident amongst the winners. So I wonder what you think about that, and if there was a particular reason why you didn't mention Medway Pride in this report.
I was waiting for the second question, obviously not. Thank you, Councillor Murray. Well, I think it's not there because it's just been missed, I suppose. And my successor will no doubt correct that when they're held to account in a year's time. I think the central point about self-funding, self-sustaining, I think that's really important, and that's the direction of travel that we need to increasingly go in, because money is going to get tighter and tighter, not less. And again, I think Homes for Ukraine is a good example of what a group of volunteers coming together with a common purpose can achieve, and do so at relatively minimal cost to the council. So I think that's really important. What I think the council should be doing in the future with regards to festivals is to sweat that asset much more. And it's always been in the past that the council will put X festival on and will pay for it all, and hooray. So you'll notice that the new Food and Drink Festival, which had to be postponed because of Her Majesty's sad passing, is to be held in February. And that is at no cost to the council. But more than that, the council will derive an income from it because it's a paid event. Now, I had to have some lively discussions with the officers about this to get this in place. But I think the advanced sales show that that type of event can be popular and deliver what our aspirations are. Second example I'll give you is the Gaming Festival, which the budget provision for that is £50,000. And the first year was impacted by COVID, so it was moderately successful. The second one was very, very successful in comparison to the first one. And because of the inflow of income, that will enable me to propose in the budget in February that we won't spend £50,000 on the Gaming Festival. It will be a lesser figure, probably about 30. So that's the direction of travel that more and more festivals in a tight financial environment need to be yielding some income. And my challenge to Richard Hicks has been, and is, how, because, you know, when Council says how well we're doing with tourism, how do we, Medway Council, monitorise tourism? So that's my challenge to the officers at the moment. They'll probably be glad to see the back of me, and then someone else will forget about that.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on a couple of items under this point, and I know colleagues have already touched upon it, but as they are referenced here, I just wanted to revisit them. So firstly, on the Section 106 discussion that we've had, I appreciate that Councillor Turpin and Councillor Curry have both touched on this, but the MDC decision to reduce what was due to be Section 106 payments of £645,400 down to 70,000 is a considerable difference, and essentially we're paying just over 11% of what had originally been agreed. And I think in terms of the precedents that set, it is worrying. So whilst I appreciate your comments that it's a planning decision, I do think that we need to take into consideration the wider programme of delivery that we have across Medway. And I think that if we were, particularly when it comes to, for instance, the local plan and getting public buy-in, Section 106 does underpin that in terms of delivery of those, of the kind of community benefits that come alongside it, and it is something we've got to look really long and hard at. So, you know, whilst I appreciate it's a planning decision, I do think we need to look at it from a strategic perspective as well. I think just following on from that, and I know that Councillor Jarrett, you did touch upon this about building costs and the cost of material. I know that was cited when it came to the MDC decision to not pay the full Section 106 funding. I know that's going to be used across the board by other developers. Is there any thinking around the longer-term impact on the council's regeneration programme and also our building works? Because obviously it is a problem, and that includes the cost of building, the cost of materials, but also ensuring that we get the labour. I had a couple of other questions just around housing specifically. So I think it's under 3.10.1, we talk about the Household Support Fund. For some reason, it feels as though this has been pitched as a great success. The fact that we have a number of people who are engaging with and reached out via the website to access the fund. Whilst I understand that that suggests the communications on this is working well, I think it does point to a bigger problem that we have about the fact that these households require this support. And there seems to be a little bit of a lack in your report around that general that sense around what will have the impact on housing, on rents and the cost of living, and potentially what that will mean for Medway residents and council services. So I wondered if you could perhaps just touch upon that as well. And then just on under 3
Can I bring you to a close because we're overrunning already?
Well, can I just ask my final question? You allowed everyone else to do so, Chair. Thank you.
Sorry? Sorry?
So, can I ask my final question?
Yeah,
Because
if
you've
it's your
allowed
final
everybody else to do so. Thank you.
Yeah, I try to
So-
be courteous to everyone.
Thank you. So 3.6 references the marketing campaign on no use empty. Could you just expand upon that, because I wasn't quite clear what that campaign had entailed? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Khan. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I thought we'd moved off Section 106s, but in terms of the strategy, it's quite difficult to answer at the moment, isn't it? Because of the state of the housing market at the moment, which is, I suppose, the best way of describing it is to be volatile at the moment, isn't it? So we, the Planning Committee, have very firm views on Section 106 agreements, which I agree with. And and I think that is, I think what the Planning Committee are doing, that is the strategic approach that they're using to deal with planning applications. So I think, I don't think the Planning Committee make it up as they go along. I think there's a direction of travel and a strategic direction of travel with that. In terms of those build costs, of course, what I've said to colleagues is that if it costs more to build these units, then we should look to push the selling price as hard as we can, as hard as the market will bear, and not necessarily just take a viability hit on the balance between the two. So if it costs £100,000 to build a house and you're selling it for 200, if the build costs go up to 120,000, I know these are not real figures, it doesn't mean to say you take a £20,000 hit, does it? So that's my view, and I've impressed that on my colleagues, Councillor Goldwyn and Councillor Doe, and that they've responded to that in terms of the price point at Garrison Point. Now, I won't get into the debate about the viability issues because I'm not sure that matter's been resolved yet, but anyhow, that's my view on it. The what, sorry? You say ours, you mean Medway Council's? Yes, well, yeah, that's right. Well, Medway Council's is dealt with through the HRA, which is a totally separate matter. In terms of our wider aspirations, we have a small number of projects on the go at the moment. MDC will be looking at bringing forward the civic site in Strood, and the lessons learned from Garrison Point and Chatham Waterfront need to be reflected there. They've been successful in delivering the off-site affordable at White Road in advance. So I think it's well equipped to take building projects forward, but it's not as though MDC is going to be building thousands of houses. I think the question is more about the wider house building and development marketplace. That would be my view. In terms of cost of living issues, well, you know as well as the rest of us the pressures there are in the country at large. Medway Council has very limited finances. We'll do what we can to help people where we can, but I'm afraid that what you're talking about is, I see it as essentially a national issue. We have a very limited government grant. Under the current circumstances, I can't imagine that will improve. It looks like it will be flatlined, and our response must be commensurate with the funding we receive. So there's no silver bullet, there's no magic potion for dealing with cost of living issues.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Turpin, please.
Thank you, Chair.
Can you put your speaker on when you're speaking? We can't hear you.
Sure. So I asked about the marketing campaign on no use empty initiative. I didn't
Sorry,
have that answer.
yes you did. Yes you did. Well, this is this is work that KCC initiated. It's No Use Empty is a Kent County Council slogan, if you like. And the work that we're doing on that is absolutely that, trying to bring homes back into beneficial use, empty properties back into beneficial use, often quite difficult, often quite complex. We've done some work up in Gillingham High Street, for example, fairly recently, the premises next to the Hollywood Bowl, to bring those recalcitrant owners to heel and make sure that they bring their property back into beneficial use. That is still, that process is still underway. We can, of course, acquire those properties ourselves if the owner doesn't respond, and that particular owner has responded to our threat to take the property into our own ownership. So that's one of the things that we can do, and we are doing.
Councillor Rupert Turpin, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't take too long, but I just wanted to know your views on how the working from home is going. I know they've done staff surveys. What your views on how it affects efficiency, whether it improves it or not, depending on the roles and people's personalities, and just how it's working in terms of teamwork. Secondly, there's not much about cycling, but we have done a lot of work on putting in cycle lanes. So would some comms on cycling be, good to get people out cycling? And what are your views as leader on the e-scooters, menace or otherwise? Because I know you've done your team has done some comms on it, but I think most people that are riding e-scooters around haven't really come across those comms. But they seem to be advancing very, very quickly.
Thank you. Councillor Jarrett.
In fact, I think you may have one, Councillor Turpin, unless I'm mistaken. But you should declare,
I've got
an interest
bike.
in that.
I've got a bike, not a scooter.
Oh, bike, all right. Well, working from home is... Some people really like it and some people like it less. And you mentioned, I think you mentioned the word efficiency, or a word like it. And one of the things with an organisation like this is we're not making widgets, are we? We can't accurately measure output. And I'm prepared to go along with the edict that is sent out by the Chief Executive to the senior staff with regards to their staff. And he is quite happy with home working, providing it meets the needs of the service and dependent on member preference. Now, I'm very relaxed about home working when members of staff are doing back office things like accountancy, transactional lawyer stuff. I did some work for one local authority a few months ago, and they actually hired someone, a lawyer, who lives in Northern Ireland and was going to carry on living and working in Northern Ireland, and he was doing transactional lawyer stuff, all deference to lawyers. And I don't see anything wrong with that, and I don't see anything wrong with accountancy functions, just as an example, and there'll be other things as well. Where I have expressed a strong view is about social workers, and I made it quite plain to the Chief Executive that I don't see how social workers can work effectively from home, or indeed how anyone else can work effectively from home the whole time when they are people facing jobs. You can't sit at home and do children's social work stuff, can you? You have to be out meeting children. And that's been taken on board, and it never did happen in that way, but there was, to my mind, when I visit Broadside, I expect to see people in there doing social work and preparing for social work, and that's happening now. So in terms of hybrid working for excuse me, management activities, chairing meetings and such like. I've abolished hybrid meetings from meetings that I chair because I don't think you get as much out of a meeting if people aren't in the room together and interacting as humans do. I think that where it comes to one-to-ones and very small groups, I think it works really well and probably saves a great deal of time and money. So I think it's a very long-winded way, Chairman, of saying I think it's horses for courses. Where it works well and can be seen to work well, fine. Otherwise, let's get people in the office and working hard. And what I have noticed, I don't know if this is the advent of autumn and the colder weather, I've noticed more people in the office lately. I wonder if there's a coincidence there, you know. Yeah, if we haven't done enough comms on cycling, I'll get that looked at. I think we do a fair bit, but yeah, I'll get it looked at and see if we're doing enough. And as for e-scooters, well, they're not for me, to be quite honest. And some of the e-scooter activity I've seen has been pretty reckless and sometimes a danger to the members of the public and to the rider themselves, but each their own, I suppose.
Okay, thank you very much. The final questioner in this section of the report, Councillor O'Para.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies again for being late. Good evening, Councillor Jarrett. It's really good to see so many achievements in your report worth celebrating. And obviously, as you know, October is popularly known as the Black History Month. And whilst I was thinking about what different people are doing about Black history, I got thinking about diversity and equality, which led me to just to look at our website to see what we've got on the website. I was somewhat disappointed, could well be, that I haven't looked in the right place to find what I was seeking for. So, for example, I found under Equality and Diversity at the Council, gender pay gap. It talks about the fact that we are required by law to report annually on our gender pay gap. And yet, what was seen there was, the last was 2020. And I went on also to look at, obviously, our duty. We clearly state on our website that our duty every 31st January of each year, we were to show compliance with the Equality Act. And yet, everything under that section was out of date. In fact, our equality report was dated 2018. Now, if we are thinking about obviously putting Medway on the map and attracting people, the first place they will go is our website. I wonder what your views are with regards to us not having an up-to-date policies on these matters, and also, especially with the gender pay gap, okay, what you know to be our current position on that, because obviously I couldn't find that on the website. And also through you, Chair, if it's okay for us to have an up-to-date report on our annual report on equality and diversity to be either circulated to members or brought to this committee for us to have a look at. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Jarrett.
Can I just deal with the last point, Leader? We have a meeting on Monday to discuss various procedural and forward-looking work that we'll be bringing to committee. So we'll discuss that on Monday. So I don't expect the Leader to have to answer on that. Yeah. Leader.
Okay, thank you, Councillor O'Para, and thank you, Chairman. I wasn't aware those reports were out of date, and I'll attend to it forthwith and apologise for the fact that they've become out of date, because I wasn't aware of that. Yeah, and the Chairman has dealt with the gender pay gap. If there are specific things on the website you want to point me to, though, please just email me and I'll make sure they're attended to. Because it's a serious matter and it needs to be done properly. So if you could let me know if you find anything.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chair.
We are really over.
I know, just a small one. On the gender pay gap then, do you know what our current status is? How are we doing in that?
No, I don't, Councillor O'Para. What I do know is that there's a major review of Medpay underway at the moment. I was talking to my one-to-one with Neil Davis on Tuesday. We were talking about Medpay. Now, we didn't talk specifically about the gender pay gap. I don't know what that is, but when I see him next week, I'll certainly take that up with him and try and see where that fits in the revision of the Medpay scheme.
Okay, and we move to the third area, pages 35 to 37, section 4 of the report, finance. Can I see members, and can you please show now if you want to ask anything under this, and I will then close the list. So I see Councillor Murray, Councillor Khan, Councillor Maple, Councillor Rupert, Turpin. Those will be the final 4 questioners. Councillor Murray.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you, because it hasn't had much of a mention in your report, about your views on the situation for financing adult social care. We've heard that the levy has been abolished, and I'm sure you know, in fact you've alluded to it, talking about the use of agency social workers, that the teams in adult social care are under tremendous pressure, and I think it's fair to say that was adult social care to be subject to the same level of scrutiny as children's social care, which of course is coming through the CQC, we might find ourselves in a similar position. Notwithstanding what you've just said about, well, there's not much money around and we'll all have to put up with it, there are ways to invest in social care that could change the landscape, and one of those is to build our own residential facilities and go back into that market, and that is not by any means out of the water for lots of authorities. It wouldn't solve all of our problems, but it would do a number of things. It would eventually turn an income. It would be an easier way to maintain quality services. It would protect our people who are in residential homes, particularly if they're in residential homes owned by big hedge funds, from being prey to the market where the hedge fund comes out of the group and the receiving councils are left with displaced people that we've got to find homes for. It would create jobs, and it would send a signal that the development company is interested in doing more things for the wider community than just building flats in the centre of Chatham. And on the issue of building flats, I've been really disappointed with the development company's lack of commitment to extra care. Extra care, that model, is a way to maintain independence in the longer term, to keep people out of residential care, to take the burden away from families, and in turn be able to turn an income. Now, I'm fully aware that legislation prevents people in receipt of social care from paying it back to the council that they're being funded by if they're in receipt of direct payments, but there's no reason actually why that legislation shouldn't change. Into the mix is coming the introduction of the social care cap. You will know that that has been delayed, which quite frankly doesn't surprise me given the state of the government, but nevertheless that there are estimates of it costing a minimum of 270,000 per authority just to bring in the model, and you'll know that we've got a project officer working on how to bring it into Medway at the moment because a new type of workforce will be needed. So for an area that is absolutely critical, that is a mandatory area for the council, that cares for our most vulnerable people, and this is no detriment to anybody in adult social care. I think the teams and the senior managers are very good, actually, and are doing their best in difficult circumstances and being honest about the challenges that they face. But there are things that we could do that would change that landscape for the better. I've just described them, and I want to know what you think about that, please.
On the issue of own care homes, I broadly agree with that point, actually. And that was something we put in place at Eden House for children. That has fallen by the wayside because the contractor basically pulled out of the market. They lost their registered care manager, and therefore they were no longer able to run the facility. So that is, at the moment, that initiative has faltered. I was absolutely adamant that Eden House wasn't the answer to out-of-area placements. It was a tool in the box to help to deal with that. But Eden House, for me, was not the first and only piece of work in that area. And officers are still under direction to find separate phases of Eden House. Was, I think some of the officers calls it phase 1, and they'll be looking at phase 2. Well, to my view, that is one really good solution to some of those high-cost placements. I don't think I don't think in the short term we'll be able to build the capacity we need, but it's something we should be getting on with. And the same applies to adults, of course. Now, we came out of the adult social care home market for very good reasons. And those reasons were mainly around cost, and that's why it'll be up to others to decide, but that's why me as leader would not go back into council owned and run care homes because of the high costs, terms and conditions and pensions, etc., of running those own homes. We were running those homes at punitive costs compared to the private sector. The balance has shifted now somewhat because, as I accused senior people in the National Health Service, what we saw in the pandemic, when hospitals had to clear beds for obvious and very good reasons, what we saw was basically, and I've said this to Paul Bentley, who's the chief executive of the ICS, basically what the National Health Service did was wreck the provider market by paying hugely inflated rates for placements, with the obvious end result that when those generous payments ceased, the providers would want the council to pay the same. Those huge, what are now hugely punitive costs that we can't afford to pay, and that's a dialogue that's now going on with the providers and with the NHS as well. I'll give you an example. One provider really recently came to us and wanted a 22% increase in their costs against a market average of 3%. So that's the sort of thing we've been grappling with. So the premise of your question, I agree with it, but there's quite a few buts associated with it. And of course, it couldn't happen overnight, but the sooner we get on with it, the better. So I agree with you. Unusually, Councillor Murray.
Well,
Okay, can we move on?
come back really quickly.
Really quickly.
Really quickly. On the last point you made about someone asking for a 22% increase, you know, it isn't surprising, is it? Because care homes are facing the same cost of living rise as everybody else, and their costs for heating and food are more compelling, I'm afraid, than the average household. So I think, you know, there is a gap there to defend providers. And I don't agree that it couldn't be done more quickly, because there are various, you know, you've been buying property left, right and centre, actually. And there are various ways that could be done in the care sector. And on the point that you made, and I was part of the campaign to save the council's care homes when we had them in Strood and in Rochester. They were gold standard. They had excellent inspections, they provided excellent care, and the people there had decent conditions of work. For me, that's an aspiration.
Well, certainly a 22% increase should surprise you, Councillor Murray, when other providers were agreeing 5.8 and 7%. So you should be surprised at 22%, frankly.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on something that you referenced earlier, Councillor Jarrett, in response to Councillor O'Para's question, on Medpay, is there a further update on the status of Medpay, and are we now saying it was a failed project because it is something that has previously been raised through employment matters on several occasions as not necessarily being a fit-for-purpose mechanism? Thank you.
Well, I think it's a matter of opinion, actually. I think it's very easy to look at any project that's been, or piece of work that's been running for a number of years, and because things have evolved and moved on and you want to change it, it's very easy to paint it as a failure, but it wasn't a failure at all. It was, I thought it was a very good way of incentivising staff. I think things have moved on, it needs to be changed, and officers are working up budget proposals for the next budget round to do that. It's just going to come back to affordability, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Maple, please.
Thank you very much. And thanks for all of your answers tonight. I agree with some, disagree with some, and that's okay. Three quick points from me. Firstly, on the splashes funding, obviously it went to Cabinet yesterday. It will come in this room in a couple of weeks' time. If you were doing a peer review, you and I both do peer reviews and support other councils, and you saw another council with that on their budget, with those expenditures and those pressures both in the short and medium term, what advice would you give to the financial portfolio holder, particularly because of its nature as a leisure centre and not perhaps something that would generate much larger income than that? We'll obviously debate that funding, I'm sure, more here in November. Secondly, on the issue, you and I have spoken many times, and we disagree on lots, but one thing we do agree on is unitary authorities are the best way for local government. There is no doubt of that. But as we saw during the pandemic, that leaves us with all of the pressures that colleagues on this side have spoken about, with children and adult services, along with all of those other district pressures as well. And I wanted to get a sense of feeling in the last 2 or 3 months with the successive changes to central government, what part have you played in the unitary voice nationally, saying that you've got to recognise us and our specific pressures when it comes to a settlement? And then finally, I've been, at the front of the queue to congratulate hard-working officers, particularly in the finance department, but elsewhere as well during COVID. But when we get it wrong, as you said earlier on, and I welcome that comment around the free school meals. When we get it wrong, it's about recognising that we can't be in that situation again. We've got some people who are dedicated to our community in this room tonight. If you gave each of us 15 minutes to say, how would you like to spend £350,000 to support the most vulnerable people in Medway, every one of us in this room could do that, regardless of what colour rosette we wear. How can we ensure we are not in a situation again where we're sending back £250,000 to Whitehall that could have benefited our communities in Medway, particularly focused on those most vulnerable we've talked about a lot tonight?
Yes, thank you for the questions. I think as regards advice to finance portfolio holders elsewhere, which I do, it's not a binary issue, is it? It's not just necessarily about money. It's about community aspirations. It's about commitments made by politicians. We've all seen nationally recently what happens to people when they don't honour their commitments. So I think It's not quite as straightforward as that. It's about choices, isn't it? It's about choices how we spend the limited funds that we've got. And Cabinet made that choice on Tuesday. Overview and Scrutiny colleagues will debate it and come to a conclusion. And indeed, Council will when it comes to allocate the funding or not. All I have to say is that we have seen a 38% increase in the costs for reasons that we won't go into here. We all know what those reasons are. And so the choice in front of members was, do we allocate extra money to meet those costs, or does the scheme not go ahead? And that was the discussion I would have with finance portfolio holders elsewhere. What are the consequences of those different scenarios? And that eventually, ultimately comes back to personal judgment, doesn't it? I champion unitaries to the extent of boredom to anyone that will listen. I'm a member of the Unitary Councillors Network, chaired by leader of Bracknell Forest, Paul Beddison. I play an active part in that. I chair the Greater North Kent group, which consists of 4 districts and us, as you know. And we are sufficiently advanced in the maturity of that group that if it ever came to it in Kent, there was a need for a re-evaluation of local government, looking at local government reorganisation. The size and scale of Greater North Kent would be attractive, I think, for a large unitary. One of the biggest problems of unitary government in this country, and there are about 50-something of them now, I think, is that mostly they're too small. We are a medium-sized unitary, and it's arguable whether we have the resource base to continue as we are. So I was elected as a unitary councillor. I will retire as a unitary councillor. I'm a unitary snob. I think it's the only effective, efficient model of local government. In Kent, we have 14 local authorities and 14 of everything. And nobody with even a basic grasp of maths would think that was efficient. Sorry, what was the last question?
The last one was around, effectively, the £350,000 of the household.
Oh, yes. Well, very disappointing, because I think it should all be spent. And what more can I say? It should all be spent.
Thank you. Councillor Turpin.
Thank you, Chairman. So my point is related to the inspection of children's care services, which it's I'm still wanting to show my concern about it, because I know we've got this narrative at the moment that we're making improvements slowly but surely, but I'm just concerned it's still popping up in these reports from the Grant Thornton, etc. I'm concerned about the resilience of the Eden House, which has been in several different iterations and has never achieved stability. It's on paper, it's a great idea. So I'm just wondering some closer governance over that, whether we need to have some really good governance over that, because it's a council, it's owned by us, we pay for it, even if we contract it out, but it seems to fall over whichever way we try it, and then it seems to take an awful long time to try the next iteration. So I'm just wondering if a different governance or more close attention to it would make any issues appear more quickly. Maybe that's just a members thing, but it just seems to us that one minute it's all going swimmingly well, and then the next minute it's all folded, and there doesn't seem to be any warning of that. And the only other thing I would like to mention is that it's around sort of fairly similar issue, but we're getting a lot of reports in Read and etc. And some of those reports are commenting about the difficulty of getting staff, and they're being paid more elsewhere, etc. And so we're getting this concern, which we're picking up, that we just can't keep hold of the staff, and so that's popping up in reports more strongly than I ever remember before in all the time I've been on the council. And so it's just a concern that are we going to run out of staff and have to have supply staff or vacancies running, gaps in services, etc.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Well, external consultants, etc., they will make those comments about children's services because at the moment we are judged to be inadequate. So they would make those, why wouldn't they? And we were judged inadequate. We're no longer inadequate. There's no question in my mind about that. Now, what the ILACs will find, I don't know, but it will not find, I'm confident, it will not find any inadequate children's services here. Whether it's RI or whether it's good, good is a really big stretch. From inadequate to good is a big stretch. But anyway, we'll see. So I'm not surprised any external auditor would make those comments, and if they didn't, they wouldn't be doing their job properly. You heard what I said about Eden House in a question, I think it was to Councillor Johnson, but anyway, earlier, about the problems we've encountered with that. We haven't gone from one problem to another. We created that model. The contractor let us down. So at the moment, that model is in a state of limbo. My cabinet is due to receive a report from officers in November about what we do about Eden House, about what we do about out-of-area placements, and that whole ethos of that I talked about earlier, where I believe that providing a small number of children's homes will reduce our expenditure on out-of-area placements and will save the council money. But more importantly, we'll make sure that those children get looked after properly. The problem we had with Eden House, briefly, Chairman, is that that company lost their registered manager, which meant that facility could no longer operate. And our first duty, like that day, was to make sure that those 4 children were relocated elsewhere where they would be safe. That's always our first duty, isn't it? To make sure children are safe. And in terms of children, difficulty of getting staff, that's true in certain cases. The review of Medway will be one way of addressing that, and certainly we've just put some further steps in place in children's social care to combat some of those. The expenditure of, I think it was 430,000 or something. So we're acutely aware of that, and we're addressing it.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, colleagues, for your questions. Leader, you have been with us for nearly 2 hours answering questions, and we're extremely grateful to you. This will also be the final appearance by yourself before this committee, your 4th in the current term of the Council. As Chair, may I thank you on behalf of all members who've served on this committee since 2019 for attending, for your reports over those 4 years. And with no political reference, may we wish you well after next May. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Colleagues, we'll take a 10-minute break. Please, can we reassemble the ever-patient Councillor Hackwell? Will be on at 8:05. Thank you very much. member of the evening, Councillor Gary Hackwell, is here. Thank you again for your patience in waiting for agenda item 6 to start, as it now will. And you're, of course, a former member of the committee, so you're here in a different guise today, and very welcome. Thank you. So we don't have introductions, as you know. Colleagues, there are 7 bullet points at 1.1. In fact, commissioning is a technical area, but in reality, there is no report on commissioning, but with a slight difference to the heading for the first bullet point of customer contact at point 2, we do have individually reports on those 6 areas of responsibility. So, colleagues, we'll go through each of them to make it easier, I hope. First is customer contact, but the report is headed Customer and Business Support CABs. So any member indicate, please, for that. Thank you so much. Okay, I have 3 members indicate. Councillor Maple first, please.
Welcome back to this committee. We miss you. And thanks very much for the report. I wanted to focus, and actually, I think Councillor Jarrett referred to this earlier on as well. Obviously, you know, we are using buildings like Broadside and Kingsley House. They cost cash. We haven't got much cash. We are currently in the process of welcoming our new tenant to Gun Wharf, and I wondered whether you had taken that opportunity to give thought to a potential change in focus. It has always been my opinion that, and there are differentials of opinion, of course, that actually the lack of customer focus at Gun Wharf, not in the sense of the staff who are working hard, but actually this isn't for the public, go somewhere else. I've never thought that's a good message, but I understand, you know, the administration have taken that approach. But bearing in mind kind of 2 things. Firstly, we're trying to save some money. And secondly, we're changing how we use Gun Wharf. And actually, the conversation earlier on around the changing face of working from home, just whether any of that's been given thought to expand the potential offer of how we use Gun Wharf, primarily to make sure that we're not spending money on other buildings in Medway. That seems a waste of money, particularly at this time when there is a good project happening, which has to mean that we're looking at how we use that council headquarters. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maple, and thank you for welcoming me back to the committee. It's been a year, so thank you for having me back. We are looking at all our buildings and their uses and what we can use them for. One of the ideas that we're exploring is maybe at community hubs and community centres and things like that, actually having some almost Microsoft Teams availability so that members of the public could go into those libraries or community hubs and actually contact the customer contact face to face, and probably get the staff in those buildings to help them through the technology leap, so they will be able to have a one-to-one meeting with someone, but via Teams, closer to their home, within walking distance maybe. And we're just going through a project identifying the buildings and looking at how far that is to walk, ride, or even drive by car. So I think that if we use technology in the right way, we can use some of our existing buildings that we have to actually enhance the customer's experience, and actually, rather than just someone on a faceless person on the end of the phone, actually try to bring it into the 21st century and actually, you know, let them see someone's face to face, but without having to come all the way to Chatham, especially if you lived out on the peninsula, or, you know, all the way in Rainham even, or out in Holding or whatever. So I think we are looking at that way that we can always improve the customer experience and not necessarily use buildings or Gun Wharf.
I mean, that's helpful to hear, and I think obviously let's see where that conversation goes. I think it would be helpful, and we've got pre-agenda next week. I think it would be helpful for this committee to receive a report on some of that activity. You know, a couple of us in this room are members of the member user group. not the acronym I like, but there we go. But actually, you know, we see some of that in quite granular detail. That wouldn't be appropriate for here, but I think seeing some of that big vision might be helpful to bring forward this side of May the 4th. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Councillor Curry, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for your report. I'm going to go focus on the cabs area, if I may, in particular the telephone service and all the threes. That's where I'm kind of going. But firstly, just to add in some congratulations to the staff for the Make the Difference award, which they've got, which is really well. And also, obviously, for all the work over the COVID time. I mean, I'm fairly new on this committee, but clearly they put their that extra came in very much so. So that's really recognised. Just wanted to paragraph 229 talks about the way that you operate the service, if you like, and times when demand significantly outstrips available resources, and the way that you deal with that. The ethos is built around continuous process of improvement, transformation, support for digital agenda, etc. And how the, I was trying to be as smooth as Councillor Jarrett in my transformation, and how the service is constantly being flexible so that the manager, the daily duty manager, is there to respond to how things are changing quickly. And I appreciate that that's a way of managing it, and it obviously has had some success. I mean, the confusion over the number of, in January it was 51% of people weren't sure which number to ring. Now it's down to 14%, but even that's pretty high. I hope you'd say that's actually coming down as we speak. So just for clarification, which number is it? Is it the 336 number or all the threes number? That's important, obviously. But then focusing on the paragraph 2.4 and 2.3 and 2.4 and about staff retention. And this is where kind of I am more concerned. You say specifically staff retention is a perennial issue. You talk about the numbers. How many staff are actually employed in that particular area? You're saying that in 2021 full year, 18 staff in similar roles resigned. And this in addition to other resignations in CIS and the management team. So there is a concern there about how staff are being retained and recruited and stuff like that. I mean, obviously, one of the signs of an organisation under stress is high turnover. That's expensive, and it's difficult for the staff who are there to manage and work. So, as well as how we're managing that high turnover and what solutions you might have to deal with it, bearing in mind how flexible the phone systems has to be and stuff like that, and also what support services are there for the staff who are clearly in a very stressful situation with their work and stuff like that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Curry, for your questions. Let's start with the 3333 question. We've talked, that is actually in the environment line, not the switchboard. The 336,000 is the switchboard. And there was a school of thought that we would change the switchboard to 333333. We went away and looked at it, and in fact what we've done is put the same message on 333333 and 336,000. So whatever number you ring, because some people might be very familiar with 336,000, some might be very familiar with 333333. So what we've done is actually another phone number. We've put the same front-end message on all three lines, which then gives the caller the option to take the same diversion to try and get it into the right place. So hopefully we've avoided confusing people out there with, you've got to ring this number now instead of the number you always used to ring. So we've just taken the step away from them, and we're making the decision once it arrives in the building, no matter how it gets there. So I think we've done the right thing in that case. You talk about staff retention. Strangely, I remember answering Councillor Turpin the same question when I was a member of this committee. It is a perennial problem. I think you need to understand that the CABS jobs are range 2 jobs, which is one of the lowest paid jobs, and a lot of people see it as an entry into the council. So they get a job into cabs, and once they're in and they can start applying for internal roles and things like that, that's what they do. So I think it will always be a slight problem, but it is a gateway into getting good people into the council and work with the council, whether they go to housing or they go to revenue and benefits or wherever they go out after that. So I don't think we'll ever get rid of that because of the very nature of the job. One of the reasons we do the blended sort of activity, and so they work on administration costs, tasks, as well as just answering the phones, is I don't think I would like to be rung up for 8 hours a day saying, this is wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Because, I mean, most people that ring the council don't ring us up to congratulate us on a good job. They ring us up because they've got a problem or they're dissatisfied with the service. So we do try and as we said, we call it blended, to move people's activities around during the day so they're not stuck just answering the phone all day. So that's one of the ways that we can deal with helping people cope, because especially during the pandemic, I think if you were stuck in a bedroom somewhere, with a laptop on your lap, it wasn't a very nice experience. So that's one of the ways we're going to cope. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hatwell, for the report and for coming tonight. I think largely the points I was going to make have been covered. I think I'll just say clearly, in the way that you've just hinted, residents will contact us as councillors, obviously, when something isn't right. So we see a bit of a jaundiced picture of council services, which hopefully are going pretty well most of the time. But there is a sort of persistent, consistent and persistent sense from some residents who contact me about difficulties in getting through. They will often say, I'm phoning you because, I tried to get through, I tried 3 times, the call dropped, all those sorts of things. Very much appreciate the pressure that the team is under, very much appreciate the hard work that they do, and the volume of calls is quite illuminating. 32,000 a month is something quite incredible. I'm just wondering how robust the quality assurance is on numbers of drop calls or numbers of missed calls. How it's easier to monitor a call that gets through and is successfully dealt with than it is for somebody who stops ringing because they can't get through, or whose call is, for whatever reason, accidentally dropped, maybe at their end, maybe at the council's end. Just wonder how robust the quality assurance systems are. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I've been fortunate that over the last year we've put in the new telephone Mitel system, which has given us much more data of what's happening with calls and where they're going and why they're ringing and who's ringing, etc. I'm astounded, like yourself, of 32,000 or 30,000 calls coming into the council every month. When you think about it, that's about a quarter of households. Why would a quarter of households need to ring the council? We've got, I think it's 112 different households in Medway, something of that order. So it's a big number. So the only way we can deal with that is say, well, where are they all ringing and what's taking the time and so on. So we do monitor through all the different areas, so revenue and benefits, baseline, environmental, how long it takes to answer a call, how many calls we get, and we do have targets for answering calls, and most of them are in the high 90s within the targets that we set ourselves, which is around about, in most departments, 2 minutes. The one exception of that is revenues and benefits, which is not very good, if I'm honest. So that's the area that we're going to start to concentrate. So if you look at revenue and benefits, they get about 7,000 calls a month. I think we've identified that nearly 10% of those calls are from repeat callers from the same number, which isn't always available to take the data, because if you've got your number withheld, we can't just report on number withheld. So unless you give us a number, we can see which are repeat callers. So 10% of those are repeat callers for some reason. We further dive down into that, and most of those calls are to find out what their council tax balance are. Yeah, or could they set up a direct debit or something? It's around those things. So the first steps we're taking in conjunction with the transformation project team is to actually give a digital version of an account. So you could sign on as an individual and actually look and see what your council tax balance is. So we are quite confident that we will get rid of a lot of calls because we'll offer it digitally. I do appreciate not everybody can do it digitally, but if you look at the census, I think in Medway, most of the census, I think all areas was above 90, and some areas was up to 98% of people returning their data on the census electronically. So most of our residents do have the technology to look. I appreciate all, and we won't get rid of all of them, but so we've got to just take it by step. So the first step is we're going to give them the ability to look at their account, specifically in revenue and benefits. Following on from that, which should be around the end of this year, beginning of next year, that will be available. And the first quarter of next year, we're going to give them the ability to change their direct debit, to actually do some actually changes to that. And that's the first area we're going to attack. I'd like to attack them all, but I can't attack them all at the same time. So we're concentrating on revenue and benefits and just trying to move it into a digital age. And the next thing that we'll be doing is going for e-billing for council tax, so that people can look at their council tax online, and hopefully that will save us some money on postage, as well as people being able to start looking at their accounts, and we will just slowly work out and what other benefits we can give to people on their own personal account. A bit like signing into the government gateway if you do that, but for just for Medway Council. So that's how we're going to attack it.
Thank you. Councillor Murray, please.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for your report. My colleague Councillor Maple mentioned we've got a new tenant at Gun Wharf, and obviously a lot of work has been done for the justice sector. I wonder what you think of the general condition of Gun Wharf, both as a place of work and a public-facing building. My view is that internally it's looking pretty shabby. There's grotty old carpet peppered with trip hazards, old furniture that is, as far as I know, not regularly steam cleaned or particularly maintained. It just gets thrown away in the end. And if there is an aspiration to bring more people to Gun Wharf, and I think Councillor Maple is quite right about that, have you got a strategy for improving the environment? And I suggest to you, one of the ways to improve retention is to make sure that people have got a decent working environment.
Well, first off, I'm not responsible for properties, which is actually Councillor Galvin is responsible for properties, so I don't have any major influence on what is done in the property. From a personal point of view, I think that there are some areas that could be tidied up. I do think that we do have some carpet that is in bad condition. I have worked in offices far worse than the condition of Gun Wharf, far worse, with furniture that dates back to the 50s and places like that. So we're not unique in having furniture that's old. But at the end of the day, it boils down to money and where we prioritise spending the money. Should we prioritise it in Gun Wharf, or should we prioritise it in other services for our residents?
Just come back on that, please, Chairman. I suggest to you, Councillor Hackwell, I'm not responsible. It's someone else's problem. I expect the Cabinet to be working together. You're responsible for business. And I regard the condition of the building, people's working environment, part of our business. So whether you do or not, I'm afraid, is irrelevant to me. You should be working together more with your fellow portfolio holders. And to give the sort of glib answer that you have just given, I have worked in worse environments, and so have other people, isn't acceptable to me either. I want the best for Medway Council, the best for our employees, the best for our public. So, you need to get your act together.
Okay, this is not an evening for speeches, Councillor Murray.
I'm not giving a speech, I'm giving a response.
Will you just defer to the chair?
To what I view, Chairman.
Will you just defer to the chair for a moment, please?
I've just deferred to you and asked you if I could come back.
Would you just let me say something?
What do you want to say?
Oh, that's very kind of you. I don't expect you to make a speech in response to the question, a speech of that nature in response to a question from Councillor Hackwell. You can have your own thoughts on what he says. You can downrate him. You can speak at full council, whatever. But really, let's try and keep this polite and friendly. We've always run this committee on that basis.
Respond to your kind advice. I regarded what Councillor Hackwell said about the state of buildings as a glib answer. I also am not happy with the idea that he can pass the buck to another portfolio holder. He is here because he's responsible for an area of the council. I'm talking about the things that pertain to our staff and the way we run our business. And I think it was perfectly legitimate. And if he needs you to shield him from criticism about that, that's up to him and it's up to you.
Really,
but I'm afraid I don't accept the premise of your advice.
I'm not advising you. I'm just trying to make a polite comment so that we keep these evenings civilised and pleasant. You can make your political points and your jabs wherever else you want.
Well, one more thing. I think it's a bit uncivilised to expect people to work in poor conditions. I don't think it's polite, and I don't think it's something to be proud of.
Well, I don't think Councillor Hackwell was proud of any issues which might require attention, nor would any of us be. Okay, we're going to move on to democracy and governance. Any questions on democracy and governance? Okay, Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Question is a brief one. So just picking up on the proposed ward boundary changes, I appreciate there's a programme in the report around some communication around this, but just in terms of residents, I know that other authorities have, for instance, set up a system where you can plug in your postcode and be made aware of how your ward boundary is going to change and which ward you will now be in. Is there any thought being given to how we communicate that to residents, and will the council be undertaking any such activity so as we approach May 2023 people can check to see if their ward has changed? Thanks.
A couple of things. Firstly, on Medway mapping, if anybody goes into Medway mapping, you can see the new wards and you can see where the polling stations should be. So even though the report said it's due, it's actually there. I checked today. Second thing, there is a web page which currently says you can put your postcode in and it tells you who your ward councillors are and where your owners. And I think it's a very good suggestion that we add another chance for that to say, would you, so show both, whether it changes or not. So I'll investigate that and see whether we can get that done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. There's a real case for the robustness of overview and scrutiny committees, which I hope we'd all agree. And that's given particular point, I think, by the Children's Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The ILAC's inspection, which resulted in Medway's inadequate judgment in 2019, I think highlighted the nature of children's ONS at the time, where, for instance, reports were not in insufficient detail. They didn't highlight key issues, and we, as a committee, despite the fact that we were working very hard, weren't in a position to make a judgment about children's services. I'm pleased to say that things have changed quite a bit since then. We've had quite a bit of training, so the LGA have laid on training for members of Children's ONS in response to pressure from committee members, of which there are other members present. We've had data workshops that were able to look at detail, numerical detail on performance and recruitment, there's been a real thrust, and as a result of the LGA training, we are having discussions. I'm hoping as a committee, but certainly in the initial point from the chair, vice chair, who's present, and me as spokesperson about how we might be changing or amending agendas and the nature of the reports that come to us, for instance. So some reports are for clear discussion, others are more for noting, reports that might just be sent to us outside the meetings for us to comment and question. I just wonder whether that model is something that is possible to or you might see advantages in rolling out to the council as a whole. Going back to my first point about the robustness of overview and scrutiny being a key driver for good decision making. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I think you make a good point that we should look at the success, or I remember being on the children's and going to the workshops and getting the data every month and things like that. So I think it would be a worthwhile exercise to look at whether there's a view that that has been very successful and whether that model could be rolled out to the other ONSs or other areas of the council. So I'll certainly look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Curry, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions which are unrelated, so I'll ask the first one, if I may, and then I'll come to the next one after I've had a response, if that's okay. The first one is in relation to paragraph 319 and 3110, Parish Community Governance Review. You mentioned in the report that a questionnaire was sent out to all the government electors in the parished areas of Medway. Do you have any information on what that questionnaire was asking and any details of that? Because I was unaware of it. Is it possible to get a copy of that at some point? Then?
Yeah, I mean, I can comment on it because I chair the committee. So what we have done is referred various suggestions, cross-party suggestions, of the tiniest tweaking of internal parish boundaries where the parishes are warded, which are not all of our 11 parishes. And a questionnaire needed to be done under the rules by way of a public consultation. I can confirm, because I had mine and filled it in last week, that those have all gone out, but they are honestly about very minor issues. Literally, one example is moving one house from one parish to another, from Who to High Houster. But we spent several hours discussing it all, of course. But if it helps, that's what that was about.
It does, but the substantive part of my first question then is about the population rise we're expecting in the parishes. Is that something that's going to be built into the election of parish councillors?
Yeah, that's been done. That's all been done.
Brilliant. That's my first question then.
That detail has all been done. So it only applies really in warded parishes unless the parish, such as Who, has asked to have more councillors. So that was their own request. So that's been picked up. And the internal wall boundaries at Halling have been changed, but it's really relatively minor matters. I don't want to offend anyone, if that is helpful. And I only say that because I'm the chair of that working group.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. Thank you, Chair. My second question is about this building. And I appreciate you're not buildings, but it's about the democratic process. At what point are we going to stop meeting here? Because the roof leaks, the roof may even be dangerous. If it's leaking, it's probably got some loose tiles which may drop at any moment. The sound quality in here is appalling. It's impossible to read the screens, frankly. There's a whole host of other reasons. It's certainly not public friendly. There are no public visiting these meetings at all. And we just kind of, I feel like we've just kind of got used to being here when actually this is one of the worst places to be meeting as committees. And I would like to know at what point at all, I'd love to move back to Gunwharf, and when is that going to happen?
Thank you, you and me both. Yeah, I think this building is not conducive. Maybe just for full council, because we haven't got anything else as large in Gunwharf to meet full council, but certainly for committees. I think we need to talk to members, because the reason that we came down here in the first place was in COVID, so we could spread out. So it would be a question we'd have to ask our members first. Are they comfortable moving back to room 9, for example, for the planning meeting where they used to be held? But I know that we are looking at whether we could create some more room at Gunwharf by reconfiguring some of the meeting rooms to create a larger room where we can put dedicated equipment, so we're not running out of batteries and stuff like that. So the plans like that are afoot. We are working on them. I can't commit to when that will take place, but it's not escaped our notice.
We would have been at Gunwharf tonight, except for the fact that there was a very complex all-day employment appeal hearing, which required the dedicated rooms. That's the only reason we're here. So as far as I'm aware, this committee will be back at Gunwharf for our next meeting. Okay. Right, is that everyone that side? Oh, sorry. With apologies, Councillor Maple.
No problem at all, thank you. I welcome that last response. This is a beautiful building, but completely inadequate for anything, really. And I go back to the fact of I wonder whether there's some space in Debenhams. I do wonder whether that's something that can be looked at again, recognising the figures have got a balance. But, yeah, this is not a good place, even for full council. I want to place on record my thanks for the team who have dealt with a remarkable, set of circumstances over the last 12 months. We've had the tragedy of having to have 3 by-elections. Of course, we've got the tragedy of a 4th one coming up. We've had freedom of the borough. We've had order people and, of course, the proclamation. Many of those things dealt with in a really quick timescale. So through you, a huge thanks to the members of your portfolio team that have dealt with that. There's 2 bits. So firstly, and this isn't about saying therefore Medway Council would have hybrid or online meetings. DLUC, as they're now known, probably about 3 Secretaries of State ago, did a consultation on kind of post that year that we had the ability to do online meetings because we're not stuck in the 19th century. They did that consultation. I think there was a fairly strong consensus across most of local government saying, give us the choice. If we choose to, as Medway Council, continue just to have in-person meetings, that should be our choice fundamentally as elected members. In your time as a portfolio holder, have you lobbied DLUC just to find out what's going on with that consultation? It's been well over a year and we've had nothing back here. And it's something that actually there was general consensus on, certainly the fact that we should have the choice as a council, not necessarily whether we have online meetings or not. I think looking across this room, I know there'd be differentials of views, but we should have the ability to decide that locally. My biggest concern on this part of your portfolio is the fact that professionals across the country, members of the AEA, are really clear that the plans for next May's election are flawed, fundamentally flawed. And that's not in the sense of, again, this is not about the principle. Whatever we all think individually of voter ID for voting, I have an opinion on that. But it's not about that. It's about the practicalities. So we have just over 100 polling stations here in Medway. Can you guarantee that each of those 100 polling stations will have a female member of staff? Can you guarantee that each of those 100 polling stations will have a mirror? That's required under the legislation. And a whole bunch of other stuff. I won't go through the full list today. And actually, lots of us in here love democracy, love the election process, but actually we deliver it well. And my concern is that through no fault of the hard-working staff here in Medway, their professional body is saying this is just not practically achievable for next May. So I wonder whether you, again, in your portfolio role, have lobbied DLUC or anybody else, the Cabinet Office where appropriate, just to say, look, we know it's coming, but actually for a unitary authority our size to deliver this on this scale is just, I can see Medway Council's election ending up in the election courts with every other council that's got an election next May. And that's, again, not being critical of the administration. This is government wanting to press ahead when professionals are saying it just can't be done. So I wanted to hear whether you've been lobbying personally or whether the Cabinet have been lobbying here locally, just on this, it's summed up quite well in the paragraph 3.1.2. It talks about the AEA, its own concerns about the impact of late timing. That's true. There is something for the election nerds amongst us, the Gould principles, which basically says everything should be in place 6 months before the election day. That's not going to happen. So, again, I've certainly been raising this in the LGA, and I just would be interested to hear whether you have as well. Thank you.
On a personal point, I haven't lobbied anybody, but I think that's quite a good suggestion. I know that Jane and her team, supported by Bhupinder, are very worried about this upcoming election. We even find out, as you can see in the report, that the guidance has been delayed to January now, so we don't even know what the guidance is until January. So it's going to be a very, very difficult election for us. We have been trying to prepare as best we can, as you say. You know, we're going to. You know, I've often questioned. You know, how is the returning officer in the polling station going to say that's not you, for example? Yeah, I mean, and what backup or what procedure is there to follow? And so I do recognise it is a huge task, and I do recognise that we've got to keep on top of it and work to try and get it as best we can, because as you say, not everybody's got elections next year, and we will be, like everybody else who's got elections next year, probably the guinea pigs for the new Election Act. So thank you for your question.
Thank you. If you could pick up the piece around online meetings in a minute, through you, Chair. You know, I think, and I think we're owed another letter from a previous meeting, which I'll pick up at pre-agenda next week. But I think it would be helpful, and again, whether that's with the portfolio holder and us as a committee, we have responsibility for democracy from an ONS perspective. So it would be appropriate for the Chair, Vice Chair, Opposition spokesman, portfolio holder to send a collective letter to say the principle is the principle, the law's been passed, you know, primary legislation's been passed, but actually, you know, effectively we support what the professionals, the AEA, are saying. Happy to pick that up in more detail on Monday, but I guess I'd look for that to potentially be not that we have really recommendations on this item, but that's noted somewhere for potentially taking forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would be interested to see the design of the polling card. How is that going to highlight to each elector the need, if they're voting in person, the need to have the relevant identity? And if they are an appointed proxy, are they going to have to produce identity for the person for whom they're acting as proxy, for example? Don't know if that's been made clear. So do you take your proxy's passport along, or driving licence, as well as your own? A lot of detail there.
And I think that's what we're...
Yeah, I mean, our elections, as I understand it, there are elections for every district council, certainly in England next year, with the exception of London. So this is going to be polling on a massive scale on the 4th of May next year. So, and it's all new, the identity, of course. Okay.
And online meetings, whether you've made any representations on online meetings.
Again, I haven't personally, but I will take that point up with the team.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. We move on to audit and counter fraud, which is from page 51 in the report. Any members have a question on that section? Okay, thank you. We move on to revenue and benefits then from page 53. Councillor Johnson, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's been a bit of a bee in my bonnet for a little while. The Council Tax Reduction Scheme has an element of hardship payment. That hardship payment is massively underspent over the years. Given the cost of living crisis, it shouldn't be massively underspent. There must be plenty of people who need that extra assistance. In fact, had a email conversation with benefits about the possibility of it being used in a particular case, but it has been massively underused for I think 10 years, if memory serves. I think I'm just pointing out to you that it's an important tool in alleviating hardship, and we should be promoting or advertising or using it a lot more. The conversation I've had, the email conversation I had, is more of the benefits team being aware of it and suggesting it in the right circumstances. That's fine as well, but we should be using as many tools that we have to alleviate hardship, and that seems an important one.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I do remember being in a meeting with you where this issue has been raised before. So I think it's not that if they meet the criteria and people apply for it, we will pay it. It's just, as you say, it's how we get that message across to people that's available. I mean, we have the same thing with the Household Support Fund. I mean, it is available, but do all people apply for it? So, and as you say, it's been a problem that's been around for about 10 years. So it is a difficult nut to crack. I do agree that it has been massively underspent for forever. But if anyone's got any suggestions of how we can promote that more widely, that we're getting the right place without creating an influx of work for people that aren't eligible, I would welcome their suggestions.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. Page 60, risk management. Any points here? Councillor Maple, please.
It's just worth saying on risk management. I think we've discussed it here before, and I think we're going to pick up a pre-agenda around the issue of departmental risk registers. Some of this is horses for courses, so people will pick and choose what they prefer. But I guess really, do you feel confident that if the woman or man in Medway who is interested in this and wants to see how their council is doing on this issue, bearing in mind we've seen councils struggle on all sorts of issues over the last few years, not here necessarily, but elsewhere. Do you feel confident that if somebody was interested, they'd be able to access the public-facing documents on risk management easily through the IT system at this stage?
Personally, I've not tried, so I don't know how easy it is to access it. I think that Medway IT system in indexing is pretty good. I mean, you know, if you search for something in Medway Council, it comes up with 8 out of 10 times the right page or the right pages that you're looking at. So if I was interested, and I will go and try this myself now, if I was looking at risk management, I would think that it would come up. Whether they would understand the little red, green and yellow boxes, I'm not so sure, but at least they will get to the right page.
Thank you very much. And we move then to section 8, performance monitoring. Any colleagues have any questions on this? Okay, thank you very much. The last area listed as responsibility is commissioning, but we don't have a report because
there's a fine line between procurement and commissioning, and I see that commissioning is, for example, if we decided to commission our IT services to HP or CIC or someone like that, when it becomes a major project, that will be commissioning rather than just procurement, which is smallest. And we haven't, in my tenure, haven't had a major commissioning project to deal with, so that's why there's nothing in the report.
Well, thank you very much indeed for dealing with all those questions and for your report again, and thank you very much for attending, and our apologies for delaying your appearance until 8, but there we are. Okay, thank you very much. We have, colleagues, one more item to deal with, which I hope you can treat really as a report and nothing more. That's agenda item 7 on the work programme. The three of us are meeting on Monday, in fact, to discuss the work programme. This is an item that I would usually hand over to Steve, our clerk, to take us through. Steve is unwell at the moment. We hope he'll be okay for Monday. And I'm thanking you earlier than I was going to. Bless her, Stephanie has literally stepped in at the last moment to cover for Steve, and I know we're all very grateful to her for doing that, but we shouldn't expect Stephanie, who doesn't clerk for us, to be able to take us through all that we have here. So if I could ask your indulgence to accept and to note the report on the basis the three of us are talking about it with Steve on Monday. Is that okay with everyone?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, that does bring the meeting to a close. My thanks again, Stephanie, to you for stepping in at the very last moment. Thanks to Phil for being here, our IT colleagues, and Paul for opening up and locking up the building. Thank you all, colleagues, very much, and see you next time. At Gunwharf, I think.